Thank you, Brian. So again, welcome everyone this morning. We have a full list of things to talk about today. Hopefully, a little bit of the substantive part of special education, also the procedural aspects of special education. We will be talking about aspects of both. And as always, we'll save plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. Brian's going to be putting this in the chat, but just remember for today's purposes, if you could just please send your questions to any of the co-hosts. We have a way behind the scenes of aggregating the questions. We don't have Nina with us today, unfortunately, but Jamie is valiantly going to step in. She has done in the past to do the Q&A with me at the end. So please bring your questions. This is our last meeting before the start of ESY. So certainly if you have any questions as we're rounding out this school year, we want to hear from you. That's why we're here today. And so we'll be glad to hear what your questions are. But again, please send them to any of the co-hosts, and we'll make sure we get to as many of your questions as we can at the end of today's presentation. So as we begin, I'm happy to say, I talked about this with my team yesterday, we're going to retire our mantra after today's meeting. We've said it a lot, and we've needed this a lot, and maybe we still need it, right? It's not like this idea goes away. But maybe we'll find a new mantra for school year 22, or maybe we will, just go ahead with other ways of finding affirmation and finding strength through our collaboration and communication together. But you've shown me such confidence this past year and so many examples of being better together. And I appreciate the emails that people have sent me to say, sometimes you just needed to see this again. And so I've kept it up this whole year, but today's the last day you will have to see this. So thanks for always indulging me at every meeting to have our mantra together. So a few things just to go back over. First is just really time sensitive. So if you haven't already, we just ask that you please, if you are one of the districts that is affected by the IDEA Equitable Services Resolution, we've talked about this before, you received a letter from us. We made sure that you knew, we sent out to you the list of all the districts that got letters, because some of you said, am I one of the districts affected by the Equitable Services Resolution? So we made sure that you found out, are you included in the resolution or not? So the 200 plus districts that are included in the resolution, we just need to make sure that by June 15th, you have conducted the consultation that's necessary related to the expenditure of those resolution funds. So June 15th is next week. I'm going to repeat this information at the end of the presentation briefly, but we just want to make sure that one of the very time sensitive things that we need you to do before you wrap up this school year, if you're included in the resolution funds, the work that needs to be done is just to make sure that you have that meeting by June 15th and submit the written affirmation to the email address that you see on your screen right now. And keep in mind that if you're one of those districts, and we have over 100, so roughly half of the districts that are involved in the resolution, have 5 or fewer students, we need to make sure that as part of the consultation, you determine whether you're going to take the full allocation in year 1 or spread it out over 2 or 3 years, depending on the grant. There are 2 grants involved, the 240 and the 262 grants. So if you're one of those districts, we want to make sure that you're getting that done by June 15th, having that conversation about whether you're going to allocate all the funds in 1 year, through consultation, determining that, or spread it out over 3 years. And then if, depending on the answer to that question that you learned through consultation, that you determined through consultation, we would ask that you notify us, again, at the email address that you see on your screen about that decision. And just notice that last bullet, because we can't get our grants out to you until we know the answer to that question. So it really is time sensitive, and we want to do it right. So if we happen to not hear back from you, and we're going to send reminders to those districts we don't hear from, but if we don't hear from you on that piece about the allocation for the districts that are the subset of districts that are affected by that, we're going to default to spreading it out instead of allocating it all in year 1. And so again, there are a limited number of districts that have to make that decision about allocating all the funds in the first year or spreading it out. That's one piece of the equation. The bigger piece is how will the funds be spent overall? That's the importance of consultation. It's why we want you to have that consultative meeting by June 15th. And so thank you for anything you can do to get that done. to schedule those meetings. And we appreciate the questions that are coming into our IDEA Equitable Services mailbox. Janetta Leedy, Jamie Camacho are staying on top of those questions with you. And so just really glad to see what we can do to help you out with anything that you need in order to get this important work done. The next thing that I just wanted to use as recall real quick is we shared with you the last time that we have updated what we call a reusable learning object. So it's an interactive learning tool that we routinely use for lots of the information that we're trying to get out these days from DESE. We have a great designer here at graphics designer, software designer here at DESE who's able to create these really interactive presentations. And so one of the questions that we've gotten about our updated RLO about restraint prevention training for all staff is whether it can be used as the training that you routinely do in the fall. There are two required trainings. Keep in mind, there's the one training that we're all used to that's more in depth, that is at least 16 hours in length for those who might be directly engaged in restraint. That's definitely not this, because this is more of an overview of preventing restraint, of understanding the trauma that can be involved in restraint. And so this overview is really about the other, it can be part of the other training that's required each year, which is just an overview for all staff members about efforts to prevent and reduce restraint in our schools. And so we know that there's an annual training that's required. This RLO could be part of the training, but it's not the full training. You can't just, this isn't a plug and play, like you can just give this to your staff and it's enough, because what's required by regulation is also to review your local policy about restraint and seclusion, as well as a timeout, as well as to identify who those people are who are trained to provide restraint. So this covers a lot of the required elements of what's necessary for staff each year, but there are some additional requirements that are determined more locally that this presentation won't do. So we've been getting that question, and we just wanted to go over that with you in today's presentation as well, just so you're all hearing this. We hope you'll use this a lot. We think it's rich with information, and we appreciate the interest in it and using it for that all staff present, part of the all staff overview that you'll need to do at the start of the school year. So a couple other just quick things in the way of recall. On May 27th, the department released updated information about COVID protocols for the summer and for next school year, in light of the fact that the emergency order is being lifted next Tuesday. And so we will no longer have the emergency order in the state. And so I just took directly from what we produced on May 27th, that for this upcoming summer, we're not issuing separate guidance, but we encourage you to follow the health and safety guidance currently in place during this school year, during this spring, for the upcoming summer. It's an encouragement, it's not a requirement, because the requirement ends at the end of this school year. The requirement stays in place even after the emergency order lifts, because we have a few days there. But we have the regulatory authority to require the health and safety guidelines that we have in place right now through the end of the school year. And then in the summer, it moves to encouraging you to maintain the health and safety guidance that's currently in place. For next school year, I've had a few questions come in about next school year, and keep in mind that we're saying that, you know, all health and safety requirements will be lifted. Makes sense. We don't have the emergency order in place, and our regulatory authority goes through the end of this school year. And a key question that I've been getting is about physical distancing requirements. So just notice that, you know, what we put out on May 27th stated that the lifting of health and safety requirements includes physical distancing requirements, and we are working with DPH to determine if there are any additional health and safety recommendations that we need to make over the summer. So when we put, for example, here, masks for elementary students, that's just the type of thing that we're considering. That doesn't mean we're definitely requiring masks, or we're not even recommending masks for elementary school students. We just want to give you a flavor of the type of thing that we're working on. I know that right now I'm also working with DPH on what to do if you have somebody who's symptomatic in the schools next year, or someone who's definitely COVID positive in your schools next year. So that's the type of thing that we're working on right now. And I know that DPH is also thinking about, for those of you who oversee nursing services, guidance and recommendations around aerosolized procedures in schools. So there are things like that, details like that we're working on, but big picture is that, we are saying that health and safety requirements are lifted, those core mitigation strategies. I put a link in here to that actual guidance that we released on May 27th, in case you need to find it yourself. So again, I just hope that helps knowing what to expect for this summer and for next school year, in case you have any questions. I want to go a little bit more in depth on the topic that we've discussed in the past, and I just used the same graphic to hopefully keep this familiar to you, that we have talked a lot in the past, at least 2 meetings, about planning for students with unique needs. So those students who won't be able to come into school next year because of a health or medical condition. Again, those students who are very immunocompromised, with significant respiratory issues, maybe students like that who won't be able to get a vaccine just yet because they're too young. What needs to happen for them? And so I presented this information last week during a meeting about what are options for districts for virtual or remote learning for next year. And in particular, we know that there'll be a handful of schools that are looking to have a single district virtual school in place for next year, which answers the question of what are the possibilities for the whole school. That's in statute, that's in state law. And so there is an option of providing a virtual school. The timeline has passed, so we can't have more virtual schools coming on board for next year now, because there's a timeline involved that closed earlier in May. But so that's on the school side. What about the individual side? That's what we're attempting to answer with the information that I'm sharing with you today. So I've gone over this before, but I just want to mention it again because we have some updates on it, that there are kind of 2 avenues for students who have health or medical issues and aren't able to come into school. On the left side, we're all very familiar with the home hospital tutoring form. That's under the regulation that's 28033. And then students who might be out for more than 60 days per a doctor's opinion, as documented by a physician, that's under our regulation 28044. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about the work that we've done to support you with those 2 regulations in just a second. But I just want to close out this slide before I leave this screen and actually start showing you the forms and our Q&A guide and how we've updated them. When a student has a medical condition, you may need to require services, which we're all used to. And I put may need because on the right-hand side there, when the doctor signifies under 28044 that a student might be out for more than 60 days, what that triggers is a team meeting. Whereas under home hospital tutoring, typically when the physician fills out the form requiring home and hospital tutoring, that tutoring kicks in right away. Whereas what 28044 does is it sets in motion a team meeting. And so the team will decide what's necessary, what will be required. And it's important to note, and I'll show you this more in where we put it in the Q&A, that it can include live streaming or remote learning. So we've learned a lot about providing remote learning in the last year. Let's carry those lessons forward. We don't have to repeat and provide tutoring in exactly the same way as we did in the past. There are more possibilities right now. I realize they have to be determined locally. And so that's why we say may, right? We're not saying you have to do live streaming or that you have to use all the remote learning tools that you developed this year, but we do think there are a lot of possibilities there. So we hope that you'll consider them, consider different options for those students who have to learn from a home, from the hospital, than maybe what we were able to do in the past. And the last thing that I want to say about what's the information that's on this slide is that we've been asked a lot about siblings. So if you have a situation where one student in the family, one child in the family is immunocompromised, in the opinion of a physician, can't come into school, needs to have remote learning next year, the question has arisen about, well, what about the siblings who might go into school and then bring something home and infect their other sibling? And so what we have determined is that we think that's best left to the district's discretion. So whether or not the siblings should also be included in a remote learning or virtual learning for next school year, along with the sibling who has the medical condition, really has to be determined locally, because you know the situation better than we do. You're in touch with the family. You can be in communication with a physician to find out more with parental consent, to determine whether or not that's really necessary, what's the right thing for a child, for those siblings. We think is better left in the hands of the district that understands the situation better than we do. So with that in mind, I just want to show you what we've been up to since the last time we met. First of all, it's important to note, I'm going to show you exactly what we did. We updated the Q&A guide about implementing educational services in the home or hospital. Because you're busy, I'm just going to point it out to you. I'm going to show it to you in just a second. The home hospital tutoring form under 28033, that's unchanged. So we updated that a few years ago. We left that alone. It's good. It's solid. Nothing more necessary. That physician's affirmation for the medical reason that a student is likely to remain home for more than 60 days, I just truncated a little bit, but that 28044, we asked last time, would a form be useful? You said yes. So we've produced a form. It's what we do in special ed. We like forms. We're good at forms. We've created one for you. So I'm going to show it to you in just a second. And also you just see there where all the forms are posted, all the materials are posted. And just note at the bottom that we are working on translations as well. So translations will be forthcoming. Right now, I'm just going to stop my share real quick. I've got them all queued up for us. So let's just start with the Q&A. I'll show it to you quickly. I say like, oh yeah, I got it all queued up. Here it is. Yeah, good. Okay, good. Yep. All right. Let me just move some things around here real quick. April, can you give me a nod? You're seeing the Q&A form? Great, thanks so much. Okay, what's different about the Q&A? If you've ever used this before, up here at the top, we put both together. We put both 28033, home hospital tutoring, and the doctor's affirmation that the student might be out for more than 60 days, 28044, together at the top. But they're very different. They do different things. 28033 starts the tutoring. It usually is what you need to get tutoring in place. 28044 initiates a team meeting. That's very different. And so we separated them out. We didn't say that this guidance relates to both. This guidance mainly relates to home hospital tutoring. So we categorized it differently. So notice everything about home hospital tutoring, 28033, is here. And we included the idea that this is what's different, that you can provide services via live streaming and or through remote instruction. Again, building on some of the lessons that we learned from this year. This can be true though for 28044. This could be true for the student who might need to be at home for the entire school year, the student with a disability for the entire school year, in the opinion of their physician. So that piece does relate to both, but we wanted to make sure that we kind of carved out the difference. And then, so just notice lots and lots in here about 28033. And then at the end, we have one question about 28044, about the student who's likely to be confined to home or hospital for more than 60 days. It just comes up here at the end. And just note that this provision includes private school students who've been determined to need special education, because keep in mind, those students who might be out for the full school year, more than 60 days, right? That is solely for students with disabilities, whereas 28033, the home hospital tutoring, is for all students, and including private school students in both cases. So thanks for bearing with me on that. I am going to just quickly show you one more form, which is the 28044 form. And this is, again, the form that will initiate a team meeting. It does not immediately initiate services. It initiates a team meeting. This is the new form that we've created. So looking here at the top, we've just put in verbatim what the regulation says. And note that up here, this beginning clause is everything that we need from the physician. So we need to know what this form helps to serve for us is that opinion from the physician that the student needs to be at home or hospital or in a pediatric nursing home for a medical reason, right? So that's an important thing to keep in mind, for a medical reason for more than 60 days. So 3 critical components: where the student is likely to be confined, that it's a medical reason, and that it's more than 60 days. So let's look down here at the form to see how that pop comes up. The challenge to this is that the two forms look a lot alike. And so that's why I'm going through this in kind of a little bit of painstaking detail, is to make sure that we kind of acclimate ourselves and use the right form for the right need. So just note that we really try to keep the form really tight to what's in the regulation. So where's the student, where does the student medically necessary needing to remain, where they can find to. What's the diagnosis? So what's the medical reason, right? That's in the regulation. What's the medical reason? So we frame that as the diagnosis. And then what's the date that this started? And then we gave two options here. In my experience, there are some students who they frankly have a chronic issue and they're not going to get better during the school year. Like this chronic issue is going to stay with them. So we didn't want to say it's solely about when is the student expected to return to school, because for some students, they may not be expecting to return to school. It might be, it's just known it's going to be the whole school year. So let's not kind of traumatize the parents by asking them to tell us when the child is coming back, because there are some limited cases where the child might not be able to come back at all during the school year. So first option, are they going to be out for the whole school year? Second option, what's the date that the child might be returning? And then the signature and date from the physician. And then one final note that with parental consent, we just wanted the physician to know that there might need to be follow-up. The school might have questions, they might need to get more information, particularly to have information that they'll need for that team meeting. And that's where it will be decided through the team process. What are those services that need to be provided for the student if they are confined to home hospital or pediatric setting? So thank you again for bearing with me on a very long-winded answer there or explanation there. And I'll go back to my presentation and we will continue to move ahead. Whoa. Started to leave the meeting and that is not what I wanted to do. All right, share, that's what I want to do. All right. And if I go to presentation mode, are you, April, are you seeing? Okay, thank you so much. All right, so moving right along, new information. I want to talk about the acceleration roadmap that we recently released. I did talk about this in greater length at the ACE conference yesterday. To anyone who was there yesterday, I'm going to go through this a lot more quickly, but I just want to make sure that I think this is such an important part of our recovery efforts that the department has been working on. We recently released what we call the acceleration roadmap. And I just want to make sure that we're all grounded in it and look ahead to the PD options that are coming for your teachers, in particular for your district leaders this summer, so that we can all continue to expand our knowledge of what will recovery look like. How are we going to approach education, perhaps in a renewed way, in a different way, as we come out of this crisis? Again, one of those gray linings of COVID. How do we do this even better? So I made sure I put links in today for where to go to get the roadmaps. We have one for educators, one for school leaders. There's consistency of concepts, but they are more customized to what you need to know about those concepts if you're an educator or a leader, an administrator. And so let's just use the leader roadmap just to orient. I know you're busy, and so I just want to give you an orientation of like what you're looking at when you pick it up. Both of the roadmaps have 3 critical components. The first is about fostering a sense of belonging and partnership among students and families. The second part is continuously monitoring students' understanding. And the third part is about ensuring strong grade level appropriate instruction with just-in-time scaffolds. And I really want to talk about how just-in-time scaffolds are such an opportunity for special education to be at the table, to be talking about how we can promote grade level instruction for all of our students, which really promotes more inclusion for all of our students as well. So let's just dig into this a little bit further. One of the pieces of feedback we got was, please divide this out into kind of logical sections. So what we've done is put it into phases, thinking about what needs to be done before school starts, during the launch of school, how we progress monitor during the school year, and then plan and reflect for beyond. And I hope you'll sort of, as you hear this from me today, as you pick it up, you'll have sort of an orientation to how it's organized. But here's a really important part about how we've got it in kind of 5 critical components that you'll find throughout most of the document. Thinking about, again, component 1 is about what's the overall priority, that overarching action step. Part 2 describes the aim and purpose of the priority. And then it's sort of built around what's the key question that needs to be asked, and then the steps for success and the resources that can help you there if you need any support in those steps to success. And also notice that in the steps to success, they're prioritized. So, what's the first thing that would need to be done, before moving on to other things? And we hope that you can almost use this as a self-assessment, that if you've got, 1 and 2 in place, just skip to the 3rd one. Because, and maybe some of the ideas in here will just, expand your thinking, make you, maybe, see some things that it's, you might otherwise just not see without having something like this to kind of prompt some of those questions, some of those steps that could be useful to you. But having just done a quick overview of what's in the document, this is what I really want us all as special educators thinking about for next year, is that how do we think about acceleration instead of remediation? And I think in special education for a very long time, we've definitely thought of, we've kind of been toying with this idea of where are we in the process of accelerating students versus remediating. And I think that there's a really strong argument, and this is based on information that our partner TNTP has worked with us on. So you'll see their reference on the slide here. But when we think about our students coming back from the interrupted learning experience they've had this school year, it's likely that it's possible that we could approach them from a remediation standpoint and saying, we've got to go back, we've got to just give you, you've missed some instruction from this past year, you've missed some learning from this past year. So we've got to kind of go back and start by mastering content from years past before we can introduce the new concepts for this school year. And so we're going to try to pack, lots of content into 1 year of instruction. Accelerating learning is really going deeper and saying, let's go to grade level content with just-in-time supports so that, we get to more kind of, purposeful learning and not just trying to start with a remediation mindset, because the problem is that students don't get caught up. They stay stuck. We don't get them up to where we need them to be. And so a challenge that we have right now in public education, based on the research that TNTP did and they put out in their kind of seminal report about the opportunity gap, is that a lot of students are getting through the assignments, but they're not actually getting, even before COVID, access to grade level work. And so how do we do that now? How do we push beyond where we've been in the past? And so what we can see is if we work on acceleration, not remediation, our students actually can make more progress. There is an opportunity for progress here. And I just hope that we can all approach the new school year with acceleration in our minds, and seeing how much further we can get for our students as a result, and really have that be the way that we work going forward too. And so, there's a lot more that the department is going to provide in the way of PD that I'll show you in just a minute. But what I really think special ed can be doing is helping to name this difference between the two. And I won't go over everything that's on this slide in the way of time, but just thinking about the way in which we can have just understand this difference between remediation and acceleration, and really thinking about wanting to get back. I think that everybody's kind of burnt out this year. It's been a really tiring year. I think if we think about acceleration, we can get back to more of that joy of teaching, joy of learning for our students, and not sort of like getting back to, trying to fill in a deficit, but thinking more in an asset-minded way about our students. And so I really recommend that this is a great opportunity for us to go back and look at the high leverage practices in special education. I know yesterday during the ACE conference, I really went more in depth around the high leverage practice about scaffolded supports, because I hope that special education will be drawn upon if we are moving towards an acceleration approach with just-in-time scaffolds, just-in-time supports, that hopefully special education can really come to the table with what those supports would be, and how they are probably good for all students. And so the high leverage practices, they continue to be updated. If you go to their website, They continue to add more resources. They've got videos, articles, ways that we can kind of get inside this further and talk with a common language about what do just-in-time supports mean. And so I hope that you'll find that as something maybe to take on a little bit this summer in your conversations with your general education peers, your colleagues, as you plan for a new year next year. So again, glad to look into this further with you, but I'd really encourage you to look at the upcoming professional learning sessions that we have planned and share them with your teachers. We've got just a real range of options, including, again, along the lines of what are just-in-time supports for diverse learners, for learners who are English learners, for students with disabilities. We have sessions on that coming up this summer. And so please click on this link, take a look at what we have coming up. I think that there's some really good opportunities there for your teachers. And I hope it sort of gives us a little renewed professionalism for next year, like a new kind of lease on life as we reapproach learning for next year, that it's not just back to the same, not just back to business as usual, that we take into account the interrupted learning that our students have experienced, but then also push for kind of an even better way of providing accelerated learning for all of our students next year and beyond. So as usual, feel free to continue to put those questions in the chat for the co-hosts, and I'll see if there's anything else I can provide in the way of information for you about our roadmap. As we get nearer to the end today, what I want to just get close, this is my final topic, but my near final topic is the FAQ that we're releasing today. That, again, more on the procedural side of special education, talks about some of the key answers to questions you've been asking us about next school year. And so this FAQ that we've produced, we're going to archive the old FAQ because there's information in the old FAQ about things like remote learning, hybrid learning. Those aren't terms we're using anymore. Our students are back. And, next year, especially as we look at next year, where we're saying that we expect all students to be in person and that there won't be a model of remote. There might be individual need for remote, but not a model of remote the way that there was this year. We wanted to just, take down the old FAQ and share a new one with you. So I'm just going to walk you through some of what's in it. Don't get overwhelmed by how much is on the screen. I just want to orient you and make it easy for you when you pick up the document. I won't read all this to you, I promise. But we've been asked, for example, about will the COVID-19 special education learning plans still be necessary next year? I've said this before in our meetings, but we just don't want you to have to go back and find it in a PowerPoint. It's in the FAQ. No, we're going to provide our services solely through IEPs next year. We've been asked a lot about virtual IEP meetings. I've answered this verbally, but now it's in our FAQ. Just notice that we've added some important details here about, how, contacting parent to ask. And in fact, I think this version on the slide here is slightly different than what's actually in the FAQ. In the FAQ, it talks about asking the parent if they agree to participate in the team meeting virtually or telephonically, and that if they do, then you still go ahead and mail the forms that we're used to them, or sending it by email or other electronic means. And then keep in mind, again, that need to provide interpretation during the meeting and then translating documents. And we've been asked a lot about how do you document attendance during a virtual meeting. And so our recommendation to you is to take the usual attendance sheet, the team leader or whoever's running the meeting makes note that the parent participated virtually. So you're going to put down the parent's initials and then in parentheses virtual participation, as opposed to having people write in the chat and then printing the chat that they were present. Just use the attendance form and just note who was participating virtually is what you need to do. And that then is that physical attendance sheet that you're used to using. Just keep using it and note who was present in, if they're present in person, just do what you always do. Have them initial it, have them sign it. If they're participating remotely, just note that they participated virtually without them physically signing it themselves. Then you'll share that around at the end. So there's good accountability for who was there, how it was documented, but you don't need to come up with some other way of documenting attendance. And then what about if a team member is unable to attend? We're used to this process, and so just take a look at this in the FAQ. I won't go over this with you right now, again, because this isn't new. We've actually had this in writing for you in the past. So we're used to how to do this, and let us know if you have questions about it. But particularly when you're doing a virtual meeting, we just want to make sure that same process about excusing someone who's not able to attend. Then again, more information about compensatory staying in here, particularly if there is a student who you weren't able to hold. We ask that you do hold the compensatory services meetings this year, but if for some reason you weren't able to, it's still a necessity. And so if you need to carry over meetings to next school year, in a sense, the time passing doesn't take away the need to do this. If it's still a need, it needs to happen during the next school year as necessary, as appropriate. So the information hasn't changed. It's just, as we think of one thing that needs to stay on your minds for next year, is that if those meetings haven't been held, they are still needing to be held next year. And then again, I don't think this one is new, but it's a carryover, and it's an important one to carry over about an electronic or digital consent. And again, we have more details here. There are a lot of things to really take notice of about what you need to make sure that you're doing this right. And so just would ask that you take careful look at those details. I think they're spelled out pretty clearly here. So we hope that the new FAQ is useful to you, so that we don't have to kind of cross-reference what was old and what was new. This is just, we kind of try to narrow it to the information that we think that you need for next year. And then the preschool waivers that we had this year, keep in mind that we will no longer be doing those waivers. Remember that this year, at the beginning of the year, we had a real struggle finding students without disabilities to participate in our preschool programs, and to really, get that ratio there that's that is required for inclusion in our preschool settings that we're all familiar with. And so keep in mind that that's gone. We're not going to continue doing that next year, and so we have had a few questions about it, and just want to make sure that that's in writing to you too. So a few final additional items, and thank you for bearing with me today. It looks like we still got a good amount of time for Q&A here once I'm done in just a couple minutes. Just first of all, we are working on right now an update to the technical assistance advisory that we had about charter school responsibilities for students with disabilities who might need an out-of-district program. And we've had a lot of requests for clarification about that difference between who's responsible for what, from the charter school or from the school district of residence. And we do anticipate, just so you have this on your horizon, that we'll have an updated version available this summer. And Melissa Gordon, who always joins us from the charter school office for these meetings, and thank you, Melissa, for your work on this, is here with us today and is always able to answer any questions that you might have. But we just wanted to have this on your radar that we're working on updating this information. And I really appreciate the way that Melissa and team have sought stakeholder input on this. So anything that you see will be based on information that we've received, that we've sought out from a wide variety of stakeholders. And then interestingly, we've had a lot of questions about independent evaluation rates. And it's important to note that DESE doesn't set these rates. They're set by the Operational Services Division, OSD, who we are all familiar with for their work in setting tuition rates for approved special education schools. And so you asked us about kind of the status of the rates. Is there anything new happening with the rates? So we, being hopefully good public servants, and when we get questions from you, some of our critical clients, we take you up on it and we try to find out the information and bring it back to you. So that's what we did here. The rates are still current, but interestingly, in our research, what we found is that there is a proposal for revised rates and other regulatory changes. And it's those, the effective date for those changes is likely to be September 1st. You know that if there's a change, we're going to bring it to you. We're going to use this meeting as a time to talk about it. But I find it, for myself, really interesting to take a look at what's being proposed, So you can go to this link that we've embedded in our PowerPoint, and it's actually the regulation itself from OSD. So not DESE's regulation, it's OSD's regulation, and it shows some of the changes they're proposing to make to the regulatory language and to the rates themselves. And so keep in mind that, this stems back to a public hearing that was held last April, and now will be likely finalized by September 1st. So if you're kind of curious about where the rates are headed, please feel free to take a look there. And just know that, when you ask us questions, we are doing our best to take a look at, another agency's regulations. Sometimes it's hard for us to interpret what is in a different agency's regulations, but we always do our best to bring you information that hopefully satisfies much of what you need to know. And then I told you I'd come back to this one more time. So if you weren't joining us right at the beginning of the meeting, if you want to just make sure that your to-do list shows an important step, that if you haven't done so already, making sure you're having that consultation meeting with the private schools and homeschool parents in your community. If you are a district that's impacted by our equitable services resolution, keep in mind that due date is June 15th. I won't go over all the information again, but just if you haven't had a chance, make a note so that you're able to get that important work done on time and sent in to us. Thank you again for your work on that. And then finally, just keep in mind, we've got 2 more meetings planned for you, July 15th, 11:30 to 12:30, and August 5th, 11:30 to 12:30. We moved, as you requested last summer, that we don't hold the summer meetings on Fridays. So we did move them to Thursdays, so that for those of you planning to take long weekends. So here are the dates. As always, Jamie, Brian, and others will make sure that we get you that reminder ahead of time about the dates. What we're thinking about doing right now is when we send you the reminder for July 15th, we're likely to ask you some questions about what will be useful to you next school year in these meetings. Are there topics that you want to make sure that we cover? And we're thinking right now about topics ourselves, as well as frequency of meetings. So we'll have more information for you then. We're going to keep the frequency at monthly through July and August. But we'll follow up with you with more of a request for feedback from you about what's useful to you as we kind of envision a new school year where we don't have to talk about COVID, hopefully, as much as we did this past school year, and can turn our attention to other special education issues that we'd love to talk about with you. So that's it for me today. I'm going to take a drink of water while Jamie comes on screen and begins to share some questions with me. So thank you all. Keep your questions coming into the chat to the co-hosts. And Jamie, glad to hear what people are asking about today.
Okay, Russell. So the first question, will there be any different guidance either from DESE or DPH for congregate care or residential facilities, specifically things like separate waiting areas and issues that may pertain to those types of facilities?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do know that, obviously across the board, there will be some places where some other guidance is needed once the emergency order is lifted. I know DPH is working on a comprehensive list of topics to cover. I don't know specifically about congregate care and residential facilities, but we can follow up and ask. I meet with DPH every week. And so I will make sure I add that to the list for next week and see what we can find out.
Okay. So there's a lot of questions coming in about 504s, but can you talk about 2804 and who's that is actually eligible for that?
Appreciate that very much. So 28044 is it's in our regulations, our special education regulations, that only relate to students who are eligible for special education services on an IEP. So 28044 does not cover or does not apply to students who are on 504 plans. And it does not apply to students who are general education students. It only applies to students with IEPs. So it's part of our, that section of our regs is all about special education. And so this is, narrowly focused on students with disabilities who are eligible for IEPs.
Okay, I'm going to ask this next question. I don't think we've heard anything about this, but we're going to check it out anyway, and I put it on my list. Is there any information about any training for circuit breaker, specifically about how to address hybrid and remote learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we'll have to follow up on that. We'll reach out to Jay.
Okay, that's what I thought. Given that staff are required to wear masks in school buildings and outside, does this requirement pertain to transportation staff, specifically drivers and monitors?
Yeah, so I actually had a chance to ask this question this morning, so I have a strong answer. I have a clear answer to that one. Yes, so for the rest of this school year, the requirement to wear masks stays in place for drivers and riders on school buses. So it's not just drivers. For the rest of this school year, we do need to have our students and our staff masked on buses. And, that's consistent with what would happen if you were to take any public transportation right now. During the summer, it's an encouragement, it's a recommendation, but it's not a requirement starting this summer.
Okay, for the new form that we have for 2804, when should they or can they start using that form?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned in previous meetings, the regulation is already there. So you didn't need the form to get started, but we asked you and you said a form would be helpful. So we provided it to you. And we did that with just all due respect to the work that you have to do to kind of not have to wait around about, am I getting the right information or not? And so this form, as I pointed out, just has all the right information on it. It's not you could get the information differently. It doesn't have to be on this form, but we think it'll be helpful. And so yes, please go forward. Please start using it. It is readily available right now.
Russell, there are some students that may need to be remote in the fall because of medical reasons that did not do well with remote. In these cases, should schools and districts be talking about compensatory services?
Yeah,
or what planning should they be thinking about now?
Yeah, and I always encourage us to go back to what we've done in the past. Like, this isn't brand new that we've had students like this. At least as a former special education director, this question wouldn't be brand new for me, because I did have students who couldn't come into school, and I'm sure that's true for many of you. And for a lot of students, we provided services in the home, and so they did get services that were we were able to provide them in the home. It's not a brand new concept. And so I know that I had a student who I vividly remember. I remember going to the home with his service providers and figuring out how to make it work. And sometimes it was a combination of district staff and contracted staff to make that happen, and sometimes it was more contracted staff. But I'm sure that I would like to think that that's not an unfamiliar, rare but not unfamiliar way of supporting students. So I would like us to, of course, first begin thinking about how do we provide FAPE, and not by providing direct services and then only using compensatory as a last resort. That we shouldn't plan with compensatory. We should plan for providing FAPE. And again, I think it's going to be a very small number of students. And I really encourage that type of thinking. We don't have to just provide it virtually and remotely. There can be students who we provide in-home services before, and I bet that a lot of you've done it in the past. I know I did.
Okay, back to the 2804. Let's say the form gets filled out, the family brings it in. Can you talk about the role the team plays in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is, hopefully a familiar role that the team has about, considering the information, making a recommendation, and coming to, hopeful consensus during the meeting about how this determination that the student can't come into school affects their IEP services. And so we had talked in the past about, for some students, contingency planning, making it clear about, what would their services be if they were in person, and then what do the services need to be because they're home, something that you can use the additional information section of the IEP for, or the N1 form to be able to describe. The student who might never come back, that's where we would actually, likely change the services, because this is a chronic issue that isn't going to be resolved, and the student won't be coming back into the school. We wouldn't, probably need to. It's no longer a contingency. It actually is the services that the student would be getting now and into the future. So I think the team would need to kind of determine, because this is more than 60 days. It could be that they want to sort of plan for part of the school year, see what happens as is this vaccine contingent? And so if it's vaccine contingent and we have a vaccine for younger kids soon, Could that change things? That could be the situation where contingency planning would matter. Is it not vaccine contingent, or are there no other, kind of variables that would help get the student back into school? And so then do we need to rethink the services and how they're provided for the student? And so I just encourage people to use the team meeting process to have that conversation. And, if you need more information from the physician, please ask for parent permission, parent consent to have that conversation, to get that, maybe deeper level of information that the team would need in order to make the best recommendations for goals and services and accommodations and modifications.
All right. A lot of positive feedback on the accelerated, the roadmap, but I'm going to ask a question, another one that we don't have an answer to, but is there any discussion about any changes to MCAS to align with the recommendations in the roadmap?
Yeah, great question. So at our board meeting in June, which is coming up on June 22nd, I anticipate that you'll hear more about the innovative assessment that we got started in a limited number of districts this year. With COVID going on, we haven't made a lot of fanfare about it, but I'm pretty excited for you to hear more about what we've done with innovative assessment. And I think I anticipate that the presentation that will occur at our board meeting will be first a discussion of the idea of acceleration, particularly through our deeper learning initiative, and then how does that look in assessment, in the innovative assessment that we have launched this year. And I appreciate there are special education directors who are very much involved in the implementation of the innovative assessment. And I think it'll be a topic that you're going to hear a lot more about next year as well. So DESE is very much embracing the idea of further evolving assessment into the future. And you're going to hear more about it starting at our June board meeting.
Sounds good. So we're going to talk a little bit about virtual team meetings again. And you had mentioned that virtual attendance was acceptable. So would that also be acceptable to use a virtual attendance for staff that might be itinerant staff that go from building to building?
Right. So a staff member participating in a meeting virtually because they're not physically present. I mean, I'm glad for anyone else to chime in on this one, but it seems to make sense to me that, as long as it's known ahead of time, that's how the person is going to participate. But I think it's a good lesson from COVID that these things can happen. And so I don't see a reason why not. But if the attorneys are swearing at me right now, we will follow up afterwards, but I do think that I can't remember anything that says that team members all have to be physically present. This idea of virtual certainly exists in IDEA, and if I'm wrong, we'll certainly follow up right away.
We'll follow up on that one for sure. So sometimes schools and districts are finding that services might look different in the fall than what was proposed in the IEP. How should they document that if they're not using the learning plans anymore?
Yeah, I mean, we're saying that all of the requirements, the health and safety requirements are lifted, and the physical distancing isn't still required. I'm a little hard pressed to think about what exactly would be different. And
so for example, let's say scheduling looks different. Instead of going from having a block schedule, it may look at 7 periods a day or 7 periods a day to block scheduling. And so the minutes may look different. The grid page may look different. How should that be documented as opposed to using the learning plan like they did before?
Yeah, and so I think if an amendment is necessary, keep in mind you can have an amendment without holding a team meeting. You can contact the parent. And if you're not changing placement, you can change services and other aspects of the IEP through the amendment process if necessary. And so I'd encourage you, again, using the tools that we're familiar with, the amendment if necessary, and then really determining if a true change is happening or not.
Russell, can you just repeat a couple questions about repeating the requirements for masks for the summer?
Yeah, so for this summer, we no longer have the requirement to wear masks. DESE encourages schools and districts to maintain the same the mitigation strategies that we use, such as mask wearing during the summer. It's a recommendation, it is not a requirement.
All right, and I think we're pretty much at the end. I think that's it, Russell. There's a couple questions in here that we'll talk about internally that I don't have answers for right now, and I don't think we have, but I'll make note of those and we'll certainly get back to people on those.
Excellent. All right. Well, this is the last time we're seeing you during school year 21. And so just want to say thank you again for all the great work that you've done. We look forward to seeing you next school year and just keep doing your great work. And thank you again. So have a great summer, everyone. We'll see you in July. Take good care.